Hello and welcome to Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to chapters 16 and 17 of Fire Emblem Thracia 776. So, hasn't been that long. I'm recording this just a few days after putting out the last episode, so I'm still in that kick, I'm still on that motion. I want to keep it going, I want to keep the ball rolling while I have the chance. If I want to get those last 5 episodes in before the end of the year, I need to be on top of it. So that's what I'm here today to do. Normally I like to give a full week to give people time to answer the question. But in this case, I think it's, I'll just, it's going to take me a few days to put this out anyway, to edit it and all that stuff. So in that time, if anyone replies to the question, I'm going to put in what they said in post. Basically, I'm gonna edit it in. For now, though, we do have a few answers to that previous question, so let's go ahead and start talking about that. At SupaUserPerson4 says, I would basically ask, what's the trade-off between skipping and not skipping the chapter? Considering things like how much effort it takes to skip if you miss out on valuable items / characters, how many warps you get / if the warp uses would be better used in later chapters, etc. If the map gives you little to no reason not to skip, then it's a bad map. Fully agree. I think that these are things that should be considered. If it's one of those maps where you can just invalidate the difficulty by getting to the end of it and just warp skipping to the end of it, I should say, I feel like that's definitely some points against it, When I posed this question, my original thought was, well, what if a really bad map is made okay by warp skipping, right? But then there's the other end of the spectrum as well, which is if a map is good and well designed, but the optimal play is to just skip past it, then does that lose it points? I don't know. And that's an element of this question that hasn't really been explored at all, I don't think. Maybe I'll come back to it at a later time. But anyway, that's what SupaUserPerson4 had to say. I agree completely. I think that it's important to consider, like, what are you missing out on? Is there a trade-off in skipping the map, or is it just basically a free skip? And then at Grixis Ballroom says, I think it should be evaluated as how willing are you to warp skip? Even that can have various factors, such as, are there items to obtain that cannot be skipped too easily? Are the enemies / layout a complete shitfest? And how long is the map? So, yeah, I mean, I think that she's completely right. There's a lot of different factors at play here, It's a matter of how the map is designed. If the map, and this is a pretty common response that I got when I asked this over to my buddies on Discord. They said, if the map is just not fun to play, and the only way to have it be enjoyable is to skip it, then that's a bad map, and, you shouldn't be afraid to treat it as such. And I think that's reasonable. I think we can all pretty much be on the same page about that. So, and for this episode's question, what I want to know is, let's just keep it simple. Which route do you prefer? A route or B route, if you've played Thracia. And if you haven't played Thracia, then which route sounds better, based on my descriptions of it? Give it some thought, and let me know by tweeting at Melee Kirby, or replying to the tweet that I'm going to post after this episode goes up, or emailing turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com. So yeah, like I said, if there are any other responses in the time between me recording this and uploading this, I will edit them in during editing. But otherwise, I think we can go ahead and get started with talking about the chapters for the episode, starting with Chapter 16, Nordrhein. So this is the route that you take if you decide to heed Dorius's advice. He wanted to go in guns blazing. He wanted to knock on the front door and charge right in and be an inspirational message to all those in the area. Like, yes, Leonster's back. We have, the power to do this. We're going to take this back from the Empire. So if you follow that advice, you start off going to Chapter 16a, which is called Nordrhein. And the opening narration for this chapter talks a little bit about the obstacles that Leif is going to face in this chapter, mostly House Frege. House Frege has kind of been the central pillar of this game. They show up a lot in FE4 as well, of course. But in this game, they seem almost kind of like the main villain. I mean, Raedric is directly related to House Frege. And you're just constantly fighting the forces of House Frege way more often than you're fighting, like, the Loptier cult. Although, of course, the Loptier cult are the main villains of the entire Yggdrasil saga. But just in terms of, like, raw screen time, I think the Frege army is probably the most relevant villains in the story, which is, I just think is interesting, you know? Which makes sense, because this is their territory. Like, after the Empire, you know, took over, they were given the Leonster district. That was their territory to claim. So, it makes sense that we're fighting back against their regime. And among the House Frege people that Leif is going to be fighting, we see a familiar face, Kempf, if you remember, all the way back from chapter 11 and 11X, the guy who has a grudge against Olwen and Reinhardt. He's here, and alongside of him is someone who is not familiar. We don't recognize them, but if you are familiar with this game, then you'll know that is, of course, Ilios, who is a recruitable character we'll talk about later on. The chapter starts with the POV from the enemy. I notice it does this a lot, actually. Almost every chapter starts with a enemy POV, but whatever. So Kempf is getting chewed out by his superior for his behavior back in those earlier chapters, because basically, if you recall, as soon as it became clear that he lost, he fucked off and left his army to fend for itself, basically. And they are not happy about that. They said, you left your men to die. This does not reflect well on you, and, you know, from now on you need to listen to orders. He says that Leonster is going to be bringing reinforcements from behind. Now, Leonster is not a place that we're very familiar with. In fact, I don't know if it's even been brought up in this game so far, but Leonster is a pretty important territory in this country. Basically, the Leonster district is if my understanding is correctly, a combination of, or it is made up primarily of 3 ruling territories. There's Leonster, which is like the prime, you know, that's where the ruling family is located. That's where Leif is from, and Quan and all them. There's Manster, which we've already seen, and that's kind of, like I said, more of the... It seems more important in some ways than Leonster, even though Leonster is technically like the main place. Manster seems to be kind of like the hub of power, at least currently. But then the third territory is actually Leonster, which is a place that is not very familiar to us in this game so far, but if you played FE4, you'll remember Leonster is the place where Tinny is from. Tinny was born and raised in Leonster. I don't know if she was born there, but she was raised there, and this is where she had a lot of that abuse come up. This is where Tiltu died. It's where you fight Bloom for the first time in FE4. So there is a lot going on in Leonster, but in this game it hasn't really played a major role yet. So, however, this guy, I forget his name, but the commanding officer here says that there are going to be reinforcements from Leonster who are going to ambush them from behind. And so Kempf basically is told, you need to stay here, do not move, do not have your troops charge, because we're going to bait them over here. And the way it's set up, I'll explain in a minute, but basically there is a strategic advantage to Kempf staying put. And they hope to buy enough time for the reinforcements to come from behind and defeat them. This is also the first time that we get the name drop for Connemore. Connemore is a character who is going to be more important to the story later on. But for right now, you just got to know that he is a general of Leonster. They talk a little bit more about him at the end of this chapter, so we'll get more into him in a little while. Now, the way you progress through this chapter is kind of interesting, because it's more or less just a straight line. There's a little bit of stuff here and there, like there's a house you can deviate to go off and visit right at the start. There's kind of a section down at the bottom that you can have people, you know, chill out in, especially flyers and stuff like that. But for the most part, the main progression through this map is going to be along the coastline. And there are 2 major obstacles standing in your way. The first is a group of horseback units led by Ilios, who is the guy from the beginning of the chapter. Or from the opening narration of the chapter, I should say. He is himself a mage knight, and you might think he's like a mini-boss, because he has a portrait and everything. And then he leads a whole platoon. These guys are actually pretty tough, not because their stats are good. Their stats are kind of shitty. just like every enemy in Thracia. But the weapons that they use are actually quite good. They have some horse slayers, which is relevant because a lot of your units are going to be on horseback and difficult to. They're not going to have an easy time fighting against these guys. There are sleep swords, which can put your units to sleep. And remember, unless you have a restore staff, if a unit is put to sleep, they're put to sleep for the entire map. So you might want to make sure that doesn't happen. Because otherwise it's a real pain in the ass, let me tell you. And then there's a couple other guys. I think there's some bow units there, stuff like that. Now, Ilios is actually recruitable, and they hinted that a little bit because a couple turns in, there's a cutscene where he talks to himself a little bit, saying like, oh, we're just pawns for the nobility to use or something like that. So that's kind of supposed to be your hint that he's recruitable. And actually, at the same time, we get a hint about another recruitable character. The guy we met last chapter, his name is Sloof, and he is chilling in a house on this map, and that's supposed to be your hint, like, oh, he's here. Go find him, go talk to him, whatever. But let's focus on Ilios for right now. So, Ilios is recruitable. The way you do it is kind of complicated. I don't think that there's ever been a recruitment like this in the entire rest of the series, although I could be wrong. Ilios will only join your team if Olwen is not on your team. Now, that could mean either you didn't go to 11X at all, you did go to 11X but you did not recruit her, or you did go to 11X, you did recruit her, but she died at some point between now and then. And that could be as late as this map. Like, if you kill off Olwen in this map, you can still recruit Ilios. You can kill her off the same turn that you recruit Ilios if you want to. Now, whether you actually want to recruit Ilios and kill off Olwen is kind of up to your own discretion, because there are pros and cons to having both of them. But before I get too far ahead of myself, I should just finish my thought and say that after Olwen is dead, in some capacity, you recruit Ilios by talking to him with Karine, which is a little bit of an odd choice. They don't really have any kind of connection to each other, but I guess they wanted to echo some of the stuff that happens in the earlier games, with Sita especially. I don't get it. I think it's kind of an odd choice. I think it probably should have just been Leif, but whatever. Oh, I should mention that it does not count as Olwen being dead if she is captured. You cannot cheese this by having her be captured. And in fact, if she is captured, you're kind of fucked because you can't get Ilios, and you do eventually get Olwen back, but it takes a while. So, you definitely want to just kill her off if you're gonna try to recruit Ilios. Now, Karine talks to Ilios and basically says, hey, you want to fight for us? And they kind of have like a little bit of a back and forth. It kind of gets into Ilios' character a little bit. He's not a very super fleshed out character, but what he does get here is pretty good. Basically what happens is that Karine says, hey, will you fight for us? And he says no. And she says, okay, bye. And then he's like, well, maybe. What I want to be a noble. He hates the nobility. He doesn't like working for the nobility, but he does want to be one. I guess it was some promise he made to his dad or something. His dad, he says that his dad gave him the name Ilios because it is a very noble sounding name, and he would like one day to live up to that name by actually becoming a noble. So he says, yeah, sure, I'll fight for you guys, but assuming that we win and that Leonster is returned to Leif, I want to be a knight, or I want full peerage and to receive a title of nobility. Yeah, so that's what it is. There's a little bit of a note here that it's pretty impressive that he became a commander in House Frisia's army as a commoner, because usually the charge of the army and the military and stuff like that, they're usually given to nobles. So to become someone important in the Frisian military as a commoner, you'd have to work like really, really hard. And he kind of talks about that for a little bit. So, I mean, this is pretty, as far as I'm aware, this is pretty much all the characterization he gets, but it's pretty good. I think he's a pretty alright character. Nothing special, nothing to super write home about, but I think he's pretty unique. Now, in terms of gameplay, this is a little weird, right? Because typically, I would advocate against saying, oh, well, you already have a better unit, so don't bother using him or something like that. You can use multiple of the same class, right? That's like saying, oh, you shouldn't use Kent because Sane is better, or maybe that's a bad example, but you know what I mean. That same kind of deal. You shouldn't use Kieran because Oscar is better. That kind of thing. Now, in this case, I think it's pretty applicable to compare him to another unit in his same class, because in this instance, you are actually picking which one do you want. Do you want Olwen or do you want Ilios? And if you want the short version, basically Olwen is better offensively and Ilios is better defensively. That's the long and short of it. Now, of course, there's a little bit more to it than that. I would say that Ilios is still competent enough offensively that I'd say personally, Ilios is the much better choice overall. I think Olwen hits really hard and Dime Thunder is really good, but also she's just so frail and takes so much damage and doesn't have a lot of HP. Whereas Ilios is definitely not as efficient at killing things as Olwen is, but that's a lot easier to work around in my personal experience. But your mileage may vary. I should mention that the reason he's better defensively is not only because he has better bulk, like really surprisingly good bulk for a magic unit, although I guess he can use both. But the other thing that he has is Soul. Soul is a skill that occasionally will refill your health bar by half of the damage that you do to an enemy. So, that can be useful for keeping him alive. He also has in his inventory a Soul manual, which can be used to teach someone else the Soul skill. And we'll talk about kind of some of the exclusive items in the different routes in just a moment. But basically, my point here is that Ilios is a perfectly good unit. I think, first of all, if your Olwen just happened to die, then perfect. You got a perfectly good replacement right here. But even if she hasn't, I honestly think, like, if you're just going for the pure gameplay, I think that Ilios is probably the better choice. Olwen definitely has her advantages, and she's a lot better at capturing people, for one thing, which is pretty good. I definitely don't want to undersell that. But I personally find Ilios to be much better overall, but maybe that's just me. In terms of story, though, I think you should, like, if you care more about the narrative and these different character arcs, you should definitely keep Olwen, because there's some story content later that requires you to have her. I guess not story content, right? Like it's some characterization and some boss conversations that she's pretty handy to have around for. Ultimately, it's your choice. Now, the Soul Manual, yes. So, in pretty much every route split throughout the entire series, you're going to have some exclusive items, right? Like, there are going to be some that you get in one route, and then there are going to be some that you get in the other route. So, in this case, in 16A, there are not very many of these items. You get a Holy Water, which is good. You get a Bridge Key, but that's pretty much exclusively useful for this map, and a couple others, but mostly this one. And then you get a Master Seal, which is, you get it in B route as well. It's a little bit harder to get in B route, but it's not too much trouble. Like, you'll be fine. As I mentioned, you get the Soul Manual from Ilios. But in B route, you actually get the Luna Manual, which is not in this route. So, I don't think you should make this choice based on what skill manual you get, unless you really want either Luna or Soul for a specific build of a specific character. But it is worth noting, like it's one of the things that you would put on the scales to kind of like, see what route you want to take. There's also another skill manual here that I don't think is in B route, but it's for Nile, and Nile sucks, so I won't bother talking about that one. That's pretty hard to get anyway, so I'm not gonna. I'll explain maybe more about it in a little bit. Now, the second obstacle, after you've recruited Ilios and had him killed all his guys, the second obstacle on your path is Kemph. And Kemph is in a very interesting spot. He's surrounded by guys, first of all. And then there are a bunch of ballista that are up there with him. And if you try to approach Kemph, you're going to get hit by ballista. It's pretty much unavoidable, which is why his commanding officer told him to stay put. It's so that, they couldn't just bait them out and have your guys kill their guys and then go to the ballista. It just makes a lot more sense for them strategically to stay put, basically. Now, there is a way to get Kempf to move. And that is by talking to him with Olwen. So there's a little bit of a fun strategy you can do in this map, and a lot of people opt to do it. Basically, you warp Olwen to Kempf, have her talk to him to get him to move, and then, because she's surrounded by enemies, she dies, and then you can recruit Ilios. Right. So that's the play. I don't know if it's something you're interested in, it's worth doing. I personally didn't bother wasting a warp staff, although I guess it wouldn't have mattered anyway because I'm not continuing from this route, but that's neither here nor there. So yeah, I didn't do that. I just killed Olwen off normally and then just fought through these guys. It's not that bad. A couple of my units did actually die, but as I said, I'm not continuing from this route, so I didn't feel the need to reset. But it is a little bit tricky to do if you're not playing with your unit, treating your units as extremely expendable as I was. After you get past Kempf, most likely, technically you can do it before, but usually you're probably going to do it earlier, or later rather. You can have Leif visit one of the houses, and inside is Sloof. Sloof talks to Leif, and they basically just have a little bit of a conversation about like Leif's destiny or whatever. This is where the Light of Zwei conversation comes in. Spike and I were talking about it last episode. We thought it was in chapter 15, but it does get mentioned here rather. And technically, they don't call it the Light of Zwei in this. They called it I think it's the twofold light. So as we talked about, that is most likely in reference to his holy blood, one Balder, one Nova or Njorun. And then he decides to accompany Leif. Pretty simple, basic stuff. He's a good guy who wants to do right, and he's going to help Leif out. Now, as a character, that's pretty much all there is to him. He does have a little bit of a connection with a character who we're going to meet later on. We actually have already met her. Her name is Amalda. She was in the last chapter. And Sloof has a little bit of dialogue with her. I think it's kind of suggested that they might have a romantic subplot going on, but I'm not sure. I know that's true for the other pair, which is whole can of worms, but I'm not gonna get into that. But pretty much that's all there is to him. He's not a very complex character. Now, in terms of gameplay, that's where Sloof really shines. First of all, just right out of the gate, he has A staves, which is huge. At this point, you probably have a few characters who are at A staves. I think most people by this point have Safi at A staves. If you're at least a little bit diligent, you can have Salem at A staves by this point as well. Absolutely. Maybe a couple others. If you're really grinding up, maybe Lenoan or Nana or those guys. You can really really go all in on their staff training and get them up to A staves. So it's certainly at this point in the game not super uncommon, right? But it's still just nice, Like you don't have to bother with training all those guys, at least, unless you're trying to warp skip like literally every map in the game. You can just have Sloof, and between him and Safi, and if you have Salem, that's probably going to be good enough for most people, unless you're trying to do like an LTC or something. So he's just nice to have around. And then my personal favorite thing about him is that he has 12 skill, which means that he is not going to miss with his staves, at least not very often. I think I don't know for a fact, but I'm pretty sure that the 1 to 99 hit range, where it caps at 1 or caps at 99 and bottoms out at 1, I'm pretty sure that still applies to staves. So there's still a 1 in 100 chance that he's going to miss. Hate that, really hate that. But it's still nice that he's not going to be missing as often as people like Tina or Lenoan or those guys who have low skill with their staves. It's nice to have a more reliable healer, that's for sure. But otherwise, I'm pretty sure he just has healing. I don't think he can use light magic at all. I'm sure he can when he promotes. He also joins at a high enough level to promote, I believe. So if you just want to promote him right away, he can do some combat. That's all pretty good. And from there, the rest of the chapter passes pretty tamely. You kill the boss. He's not really that threatening. And yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it. You capture. There's some I should mention that there's some bandits around trying to get to the houses. You have to be kind of quick with one of them, which is the one kind of near where Ilios is. That's the only one where you have to hurry a little bit to get to. But for the most part, they're really easy to defend. So it's not really that big of a deal. Now, once you beat the boss and capture the castle, Dorius and Leif have a really nice conversation about Leonster. Because they're basically, at this point, they're on Leonster's doorstep. They're really close. And Leif talks a little bit about what he remembers from that time in his life. Because if you recall, it's been about 13 years since he fled from Leonster. So he was still a very young child. And he doesn't remember very much. But what he does remember is that there was a big fire the night that he had to leave Leonster. It was so bright that he said that he thought the sun had risen early or something to that effect, which is, very evocative imagery. But then, of course, the other thing that I think people are going to take away from this conversation is Finn. Finn cried that night, and understandably so, in my opinion. He had lost basically everything. But what Leif says there is that after that night, Finn never cried again. Or rather, Leif never saw Finn cry again. So, clearly, Finn was putting on a real strong face for Leif. Which is cool. That's awesome. But Leif also kind of punctuates this with a very sad idea, which is that it seems like Finn also forgot how to laugh at that point in time as well. So, man, it's just, I just feel so bad for obviously Leif too, because he's been kept away from his home for so long. But this was everything for Finn. This was Finn's entire life was dedicated to serving Leonster, and it was taken away from him. And I think the fact that he is now here, about to take it back, has got to be unbelievably cathartic. Who knows? We don't get any kind of details about how Finn's feeling and all this. I'm sure I would be shocked if it didn't come up next chapter. Not next chapter, but next episode. But we'll have to see. But anyway, this is just me gushing about Finn because he's like one of the best characters in the game. I think definitely second place behind Lewin, if not number one. Personally, I still like Lewin more, but, I think you can make a very, very compelling argument that Finn is the best character in Yggdrasil. Not just this game, but in Yggdrasil in general. All right, and, they also talk a little bit about Connemore, but that's not really important. They kind of hint that, like, maybe something's going on with Connemore because he's supposed to be, like, a cool dude. But he's fighting with the Empire. What's up with that? And Doria says, I don't know. Well, I guess maybe we'll find out. You actually never find out what's going on in this route. It's it's an interesting situation where, I guess I might as well explain this now, right? Because we have Sleuth, so it's relevant, basically. There are more or less 2 exclusive characters to each route. In a route, we have Sleuth, and then we have a character who we're going to get next chapter called Misha. They are both exclusive to the A route. Technically, Ilios is also exclusive to the A route, but because you have to kill off Olwen to get him, he's not like an extra unit. You're basically just trading one for another. But you only have that option in A route, so if you want to count him, you could, but it doesn't really matter. And then in the B route, we have Miranda and Shanam, who is a character that we've met earlier, we'll talk about him, trust me. But Miranda is a character, again, we're going to get more into details about her later, but basically she is the reason that Connemore is fighting against you. They've taken her hostage, and she is very important to Connemore, so they are fighting. Basically, they're under the thumb of the Empire. Now, later in the game, there is a chapter where Connemore shows up, as well as Amalda, and both of them are recruitable. However, you can only recruit one of them, because Amalda is recruited by Sleuth, who is exclusive to the A route, and Connemore is recruited by Miranda, who's exclusive to the B route. So you're going to have to pick and choose one, and you pick and choose your route, and that determines who you get later. Each of them show up on the opposite route as an enemy. So Connemore shows up in A route as an enemy, and then Amalda shows up in B route as an enemy. So if you wanted to, you could always kill them here so that you don't have to deal with them later, since you're not going to be able to recruit them anyway. It's a little bit of a complicated dynamic, but if you're confused about it at all, you can always look up a guide. It makes sense when you kind of see it laid out in front of you. But I did actually forget to mention, Connemore does eventually show up with reinforcements in this chapter. He comes from behind, as they said. The problem is that it doesn't show up until, I want to say, like, turn 20 or something. And by that point, the map is long over. I think I finished this map on, like, turn 10. So I wasn't even close to seeing this guy. He has the Nile manual on him, which is why I said it was hard to get. Not because it's actually hard to get the manual. You can just walk up to him and steal it. But because you're not gonna stick around for that long. Like, why would you bother? But anyway, that's not important. Connemore is in this map. But you have to wait around a long time to actually see him, so you're probably going to miss out on it. Even my first playthrough, and I was doing things pretty slow my first playthrough. I don't think I saw him until chapter 19, which is where he's recruitable on B route. So yeah, it doesn't matter. Anyway, that's it for chapter 16a. So let's move on to chapter 17a, which is called The Gates of Leonster. So we start off this chapter, again, with an enemy POV. And basically we see the commanding officer of these guys guarding the castle basically saying, yeah, we're not really worried about it. Leif is not going to be able to get past us because we have a lot of dudes and a lot of really strong dudes. Basically, he kind of runs through quickly some of the guys that they have. They have a group of Loptier mages who are going to be helping them from the sides. There's a group of armor knights that he says are top notch, some strong dudes. There are reinforcements coming from behind as well that are supposedly being led by Reinhardt, who we've heard about before but we've never met. So that's interesting for sure. His reputation precedes him because he's supposedly very strong. So that ought to give you something to worry about. He talks about the Silesian Pegasus Knights that they have on payroll, who we met back in chapter 14X. So they have those guys as well. And then finally, this is kind of the icing on the cake, he says that they're expecting a visit from Sias, who, if you don't remember who that is, I don't blame you, because he hasn't been around very much. Basically, he is the guy who helped Merida escape from Manster. After they had to leave Manster without getting Merida back, Sias and Galzis, both of whom we met at that point, helped her to escape, essentially, and got her out of there. And Sias is the person who gave her the Darkness Sword, or Merida's Blade as we know it now, and basically told her, like, hey, a sword is only as good as the person who wields it, or, that all that really cool sword speech stuff that he gave us back in chapter 12, so... we don't know a whole lot about him at that time, but now apparently we're finding out that he is a genius strategist. He is so good at what he does that basically by himself, even putting aside all the other assets they have, they think that he is going to win them this battle. So that should go a long way to showing how important he is. This is a really good piece of gameplay story integration as well, which we'll talk about later. Something that Thracia does extremely well is gameplay story integration. So this is a great example of it. The boss has a brief conversation with Misha, who we met again in chapter 14X. And basically, they have a little bit of a talk. It's suggested here that Misha's mom was someone that was killed by Sigurd. And there aren't a whole lot of people that could be referring to, just based on context. Now, of course, we could always just assume that it's just a generic Pegasus Knight or whatever. But what would make more sense to me is that it was Pamela. Pamela, it was a mini boss in, or maybe was it Pamela, or was there more than one? There were a couple of green-haired Pegasus Knights that served as mini bosses in chapter 4 of FE4, and Sigurd kills them because they're trying to kill Sigurd. So the guy in charge, the boss, suggests that maybe that's why Misha is helping them. But basically she says, no, I just want to be able to make enough money to help the children in Solis who are starving to death, because apparently there are a lot of children who are starving to death. That's all the reason that she gives, and that's good enough reason for her. So this is kind of supposed to be your hint, I guess, that she's recruitable, because she's not evil, she's just doing this because she feels like she has to. Then we cut to Leif's POV for a very brief conversation where, again, in case it wasn't clear yet, the Pegasi are recruitable. August says something about how, like, oh, these Pegasi are really tough, but are they totally willing to fight us? Or something like that. You know, he kind of suggests that maybe you can convince them to turncoat. All right, and that's where the map starts. So your main objective is the top right corner, and you're on the bottom left, essentially. So you have to work your way up. There's a couple different ways you can approach. But the main way I think it wants you to go is that you can go through some forest up north and then go down around a river bend, getting hit by ballista all the way through, and then make your way to the gates from there. So there's not a whole lot of things directly standing in your way. In fact, if you just play this map in a straight and don't go after any of the side objectives, it's really, really easy until you get to the very end where all those ballista are. That's when things start to get a little bit tougher. But we'll talk about that shortly. There are two main problems with this map, or not problems, but there are two main obstacles that you're going to run into in this map. First of all, there is a recruitable character on this map, other than Misha, actually. We'll talk about Misha shortly. But she is located in the church on a cliff that you can see when you start the map. It's kind of over on the left side. Now, in order to recruit her, you need to basically clear out some dark mages that are positioned up on top of there and are, going to be firing off spells, and they have like warp staves and stuff like that. So it can be kind of tricky to deal with them. Usually I just have Dean and Karine, hit them with some hit and run tactics. It's usually pretty easy to get rid of them. Although they might get a good chunk in on you every now and again. Once those guys are cleared out, you can have anyone, it doesn't have to be Leif or anything like that, visit the church, and inside there is a bishop. And basically, we're given very little context into what's going on in A route. We get a little bit more in B route. Basically, there is a bishop who seems to be taking care of a little girl, and once she realizes that you are with the Liberation Army, she decides that she's going to go with you. That is all the information that she gives you in A route. And honestly, you don't get a lot more in B route, but you get some, I guess, better than nothing. In A route, she's very cagey and mysterious about the whole thing. She does not have a conversation with Leif, as far as I know, in this route. We'll talk a little bit more about her character, I think, when we get to B route. I guess this is as good a way as any to split it up. We'll talk about her gameplay viability here, and then in the next chapter, or the next, I guess the next chapter, we'll talk about her personality, story, writing, that stuff. In terms of gameplay, Sarah is a very, 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 very good unit. She requires a little bit of investment, though, and I really do mean a little bit. Sages in this game, she starts off as a sister, which is the same class that Lenoan is. She can use various types of magic and staves. She's like level 7 and has really low stats, but good growth rates, really good skills. She has Wrath, Miracle, and Paragon, so she levels up quickly. And then the main thing that makes her really good is that when she promotes, her stat gains are through the roof. She gets like +6 skill, magic, speed, like all this crazy stuff. So really, to make her work, all you have to do is give her like 3 kills and promote her, and then that's it. That's all there is to it, and you have yourself a pretty busted Sarah on your hands. Of course, she's another staff unit too, so if you want to train her in that aspect, you can. Although I think she starts off with pretty low staves, if I'm not mistaken. Is it? Maybe it's C rank. I don't know, but that's a pretty big factor in her usability as well, is that she can do stuff with staves. She can support people from the sidelines, things like that. But she's also pretty good at combat as well. So overall, I think Sarah's a lot of fun to use. A little bit trickier than maybe some characters, especially at this stage of the game. But I would mostly not say that it's too big of a problem. Now, regardless of whether you actually want to use her or not, though, this is really important. In order to unlock a Gaiden chapter later in the game, you need to recruit Sarah and have her stay alive for basically the entire game. That goes for both A route and B route. You do get her on both routes, and regardless of what route you pick, you have to keep her alive for the entire time. All right, let's talk about Misha. So Misha eventually, probably even before you get Sarah, to be honest, although it's a little bit, your mileage may vary, she comes at you with her group of Pegasus Knights. They're not very strong. They're very easy to kill. Misha herself is a pain in the ass to recruit, actually. And honestly, I would almost even say not worth it, although she's a flyer, and that's pretty good. So take it or leave it. I guess you might have a different experience with her. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. What you need to do is two things. First of all, you need to talk to her with Karine. Back-to-back chapters where characters are recruited by Karine. But she doesn't actually get recruited by Karine because when you talk to her with Karine, she basically says, "Fuck off! I need to fight you guys. The battle is still going on, etc." What you need to do after talking to her with Karine is put her to sleep in some method, because doing that is the only way to force her to dismount. And dismounting is the only way to capture her. And you need to capture her and hang on to her to the end of the chapter in order to recruit her, but only after talking to Karine. So it's a little bit convoluted, but hopefully you're able to pull it off. Now, there are a few different methods to put her to sleep. Obviously, of course, there's the sleep staff, which we've had for a while now. If you've used it too many times, you could always repair it, whatever. But then also, in the previous chapter, if you managed to steal some sleep swords from one of the there were actually 3 cavaliers that had sleep swords. You could get all of them, or you could just get 1 or 2 of them, or whatever. Getting more actually helps with the recruitment we're going to see later on, but that's not important right now. So if you want to use that instead, you're also able to do that as well. Once she has been successfully dismounted, you can capture her, and you just got to hang on to her for the whole chapter, basically, after that. So that's kind of a pain, but I actually have a little bit of a confession to make. I fucked up. I talked to her with Karine. I put her to sleep. I captured her. But at some point, I accidentally released her, and she does not stick around. She takes off, and you cannot recruit her. It's unfortunate. I did not reset the chapter, so technically I'm cheating a little bit because I did say that I was going to do full recruit, but I basically did. I'm not. I've said this a few times now, but I'm not continuing from A route. I'm continuing from B route, and so it really didn't matter. Like, I wasn't going to get to use Misha anyway, and I did everything that I would have had to do to recruit her anyway. So it didn't make that much of a difference, in my opinion. Like, practically nothing changed, but technically, I did not recruit her. So, crucify me, yell at me, do whatever you want to do, but it doesn't matter. I'm continuing from B route anyway. Now, technically, we are not given Misha this chapter. We don't recruit her, and she doesn't join our team until the beginning of next chapter. But we'll talk about her here, since I'm not going to be able to talk about her in that chapter anyway. So Misha as a character is not very interesting, in my opinion. She's cool, right? Like, she's doing what she's doing for the sake of the kids and people she cares about in Silice, because without turning to mercenary work, she's going to, they're all going to starve to death. And she doesn't want that, so she really needs to focus in on fighting and making sure that no one can sway her off of her path. Eventually, Leif kind of helps her see the error of her ways. This is a conversation that happens at the end of the chapter, but I guess we'll just talk about it here, since it's relevant to her character. If you successfully, once you beat the map, if you've captured her and all that stuff, Leif talks to her, and basically she says, "Hey, I'm just trying to protect the children." And Leif basically tells her, like, listen, if you're helping the Empire, you're basically just sacrificing other children for the children in your country. Because the Empire are killing children, just straight up. And by doing what she's doing, by aiding the Empire, she's saying, I'm willing to facilitate the death of these other children if the children in the country that I care about are safe. And Leif says, that's all well and good, but eventually they're going to come for you too, and you will not be able to stop them. Interestingly, it doesn't seem like Misha actually knew about the child hunts, which the existence of child hunts is kind of weird in terms of like who knows about it and stuff like that. I was under the impression that it was a pretty widespread rumor, but that no one actually knew about it. Like they didn't think it was real, or they couldn't prove it was real, or whatever. But in this instance, it seems like Misha has never even heard about that as a possibility, so I'm not really sure what's up with that. But so basically, she's a kind, caring soul who just wants to do the right thing for the people she cares about. That's pretty cool and all. A little generic. She doesn't really have much more going on than that. And yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about her. In terms of gameplay, she's pretty good. She's a flyer. She has decent combat, decent weapon ranks. That's really all there is to say. I mean, she's better than Ida. She's probably about on par with like an average Karine, although my Karine is like above average, so she'd probably be worse anyway. Just, humble brag, but yeah. So ultimately her combat is fine. It's perfectly serviceable. In Thracia, that's not really that big of a deal. But what she does bring to the table, and what she's quite good at, is being a good utility unit. She can fly people around, and that's huge. That's a huge benefit in certain maps. Now, unfortunately, Misha is not actually going to be able to fly in many of these maps, because from this point onward, the maps in this game are almost exclusively indoor. There are a couple more outdoor maps. There's actually a couple that feature both indoor and outdoor segments, similarly to Chapter 3. But for the most part, it's going to be indoors. So only a couple more chapters where Misha is able to literally and figuratively spread her wings and fly. But, take it or leave it, I guess. She's still pretty fine. In those chapters, she does well. Now, things in this chapter really start to get interesting on turn 10, because a bunch of stuff happens on turn 10. First of all, as foreshadowed earlier, Sias shows up. The Sias. He shows up, and everyone on the enemy side is like, oh my god, thank Christ, he's here. The man, let's fucking go, we can do this. Everyone gets a huge boost in morale, and that is reflected through the fact that Sias has 5 leadership stars, which is an absolutely enormous amount, and boosts the hit and avoid of all enemies by 15, which is crazy. Really great example of gameplay story integration. Again, something that Thracia absolutely excels at, and it's done incredibly well here, especially. It's also at this point that there are some armor knights who have been kind of cloistered up on this little secluded area. They lower a bridge so that they can come get you. They're not that threatening, to be honest. They kind of are, right? Because they are kind of dodgy because of all the shit with Sias. But for the most part, they shouldn't be too difficult to take down. I should mention that there are a few houses that you can get in this chapter, and a lot of them have very good items. Most notably, one of them has a warp staff, and another one has a rescue staff. I'm sorry. There's 4 houses. There's a warp staff, a rescue, a magic ring, and another holy water. That's 2 in this route. I didn't even realize that. I don't remember off the top of my head what you get in B route. I'll have to check when we go over those maps. But now, dealing with Sias is pretty difficult. The enemy gets a real big boost from this, and it can be really tricky to actually do anything about it. Sias himself is in, I guess you could warp someone there to just kill him, but you probably shouldn't do that because he does not stick around for the entire rest of the map. Instead, he goes away on turn 15, but we'll get to that in just a moment. On turn 12, some reinforcements come in from behind. These are the reinforcements that Reinhardt was supposedly bringing in to help fight off Leif. However, instead of Reinhardt, they're being led by someone else, just a generic mini-boss. I think his name is Mueller. And he mentions that Reinhardt was going to be there, but he had to go with Ishtar back to a place called Connaught, which, I know what Connaught is, but it's not really that important right now, so I won't bother explaining it. They kind of go back and forth a little bit about this. The one guy is really frustrated that Reinhardt isn't there, which is understandable because he's the crux of their strategy. But apparently he had to go back for something really important. This is our first indication that Reinhardt really cares about Ishtar. I don't know if it's been explicitly set up to this point, but Reinhardt is Ishtar's personal attendant and guard, or at least like is like plays a significant role in her life. They're kind of, you know, connected at the hip in a lot of ways. But to leave with Ishtar during what is such a pivotal battle seems a little bit excessive, and I'm honestly kind of with the first soldier there. He was like, "Oh, come on, you got to be fucking kidding me right now." But, you know, it is what it is. Reinhardt is not there, and we'll have to fight him another time, which is good for us, because if Reinhardt actually showed up, we'd be fucked. Oh, I completely forgot. There's a cutscene that plays when Sias shows up, where Dorius and August just start shitting themselves. They say, we need to retreat right now. We cannot win this fight with Sias here. We're going to lose. Please, Prince Leif, order a full retreat. So yeah, everyone's just hyping this guy up. Everyone thinks he's the best thing since sliced bread. Leif is a little bit unclear on who exactly this guy is. Essentially, he is the son of someone named Ida, who we did meet in FE4. She was very unimportant. She was like the person who turned on Reptor at the very end of Gen 1. She was around for like 5 minutes. But apparently she was a close attendant of Arvis. And the implication here is that he is actually the illegitimate love child of Arvis and Ida, which would make him half-brothers with Julius and Julia. Interesting. I don't know if this ever goes anywhere, but that's what they seem to be suggesting. They also mentioned that his mom, Ida, was killed in mysterious circumstances. Sorry, she died in mysterious circumstances. What this is up for debate. I've personally always been in the camp that they killed her off. Sorry, I should be more specific. The Laptir cult killed her off so that Arvis would still basically have a child with Deirdre, and they didn't want anyone getting in the way of their plan, basically. So they saw Arvis with this other woman who, you know, they're worried might interfere with Arvis and Deirdre hooking up, and basically decided to kill her. But that's never made explicit, at least not in this chapter. So between waiting out Sias and getting rid of these reinforcements, you know, turn 15 comes pretty quickly. Sias leaves on turn 15, as I mentioned. The reason he does this is because that Ishtar comes to him and says, hey, Prince Julius has fallen ill, and he needs to be taken care of by somebody. Will you please come with me? And he says yes. He kind of suggests, like, oh, couldn't Manfroy and the Laptir cult take care of it? But Ishtar really does not want that. She really wants it to be Sias because, well, she doesn't specify why, but it's pretty obvious that, you know, she knows something's up. She doesn't want Manfroy to have any more influence over Julius than is necessary. So Sias agrees to help, and he leaves. Basically, a lot of things go wrong here that ultimately end up costing the Empire this entire battle, and possibly, by extension, the entire war. We'll have to see how that pans out over the next couple chapters. The actual approach to this castle is probably the hardest part of the map, just because there are ballista firing down on you, and there's long-range magic firing down, and there's a lot of shit that can hurt you, and it's pretty likely that you'll die, I'll say. It's just, you know, there's a lot of stuff you could get hit by. The best strategy, albeit a little boring, is to just wait out at least the tomes, right? Like the ballista you might be able to manage, but the tomes you can probably just like park Asvel, you know, close enough for him to get hit by the tomes, but they're going to do like no damage. So you just have him soak up all those hits if you want. Now, if you're like me, and at this point you know that you're not actually doing anything after this map, you just play the rest of the chapter with reckless abandon, and multiple of your characters die, and it's fine. Don't even worry about it. But yeah, that's the end of the chapter, basically. Once you clear out these ballista, the boss himself is pretty easy, and you don't gotta worry about it. It's a fun map. It has a lot of different moving pieces, but ultimately, there's not, like, it settles down to a pretty tame place after a while, and you don't have to worry about it too much. Kind of grinds to a halt, considering that the best strategy is to just wait out and soak up the meteor tomes and the bolting tomes and stuff like that. So, after you successfully capture the castle, Dorius, Leif, and August have a quick little conversation about this man inside named Gustav, who is apparently Bloom's right-hand man, and has been given full control over Leonster. Apparently he's a real dick, and rules with an iron fist like a tyrant, so we really got to do something about this guy, for obvious reasons. And then if you manage to successfully capture Misha, this is where that conversation I mentioned earlier happens, where Leif basically talks her into joining him. And it's a nice little conversation there. But yeah, that's it. That's the end of the chapter. And that is all for A Route. Pretty good maps overall, I would say. I don't love them, but I think that they're really solid. And some of the better maps that we've seen in a while, I think overall this game has been very much on an upward trend in terms of the quality of its maps. And we'll see if it can maintain that. But, if my memory serves me correctly, the answer is probably not. But we'll have to see. Now, this is normally where I would talk about B Route, but honestly, I'm kind of sick of talking about these chapters, and I don't really want this episode to be all that long, so I think I'm going to wrap it up here, and we can move on to talk about... sorry guys, someone's at the door. Give me 1 second. Whoa, guys! This is nuts. It's Yoshikage Kira from the hit manga series JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Diamond is Unbreakable, released in 1992, written by Hirohiko Araki. How are you, man? That's awesome. Yeah, well, I'd love to chat with you, but I'm in the middle of a podcast right now. I was just about to move on from the chapters I was talking about. Kira, what do you? No, Kira, please. No, I don't want to go back. Please, don't make me do this. Kira! Anyway, let's go ahead and get into our chapters for the episode, starting with chapter... Did you guys feel that? What just... That was weird. Whatever. Anyway, where was I? Yes. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with our chapters for the episode, starting with Chapter 16, Mirage Forest. This is the course that Leif and his army take if they decide to follow along with August's plan, which, if you recall, involved going around the back, basically, and, trying to sneak in where there would be less heavy guard and there wouldn't be that many enemies to fight. At least that was the plan on paper. So in order to get there, though, they needed to travel through a place called the Mirage Forest, which, as the name implies, is famous for being difficult to navigate and getting lost in. So they're going to have to figure out a way to deal with that. Now, it turns out that there's actually a Loptir temple here, a temple for the Loptir cult. And the head bishop there notices Leif's approaching army and says, hey, well, they came right into our hands. They probably wanted to go this way to avoid the enemies, and it looks like they've made a really fucking big mistake. So let's take advantage of that, shall we? And he sends out some guys to go deal with you. And there are a few just like general Empire soldiers around as well. There's not that many, though. As this map starts, you're going to see that it is an escape map. The escape point is in the top right of the map. You guys start in the bottom left. So you need to travel across the forest. And yeah, I mean, that's basically the long and short of it. There's more to it than that, but, we'll explain that more as the chapter goes on. Just at first glance, it's just navigating a forest. In the center of the map, there is a castle or temple where the boss is situated. And the boss's name is Reincock. And I don't have anything else to say about that. It's just really funny that his name is Reincock. But other than that, there's also some Loptir sorcerers that come out of there every turn. I think there's a chance that one of them spawns. The sorcerers here are pretty easy to capture, so I actually picked up a bunch of them and stole their dark tome so that I could sell them for money, because I don't have a lot of that right now, and you kind of need some if you want to get weapons and stuff. So I'm down bad on weapons, let me tell you. It's not going too hot for me. Now, as you navigate the forest, there's going to be a few things that you notice. First of all, as I said, there are a couple of scattered enemies throughout the forest. There's some heroes and swordmasters and warriors, and a few of them have really nice weapons. Particularly, there's a couple of ones worth mentioning. There's one guy who has a Luna manual, which is the counterpart to A-Route's Soul manual. I'm pretty sure this is the only place where you can get one in the game, and then you cannot get the Soul manual if you take this route at all. So that might be a factor. If you have a character who you really want to get Soul, you might rather go A-Route instead of B-Route, or vice versa. And there's a few, there's a sleep sword here. There's not as many as there are on A-Route, but there is a sleep sword. There's a wind sword one of the guys has. I tried to... Oh god, I gotta talk about that in a minute, huh? There's a guy who has a wind sword. I'll talk about the pain in the ass that he was in just a moment. I'm trying to think. I mean, there's one more, but that's kind of... I was saving that one for last. There's like a couple other... There's like a silver sword in there somewhere. It's all some pretty fucking good stuff. The boss has a berserk staff. Yeah, so that's pretty handy to get your hands on if you're able to. There's some strats later on in the game that involve using the berserk staff to berserk a powerful boss and let them fight their comrades and things like that. I was not able to get it. You either have to capture him, which can be pretty fucking hard to do, and I didn't bother, or you could wait for him to break all three uses of the restore staff, or the berserk staff, and then steal it with Leif or Parn or Lara or whatever. It loses its weight when it's broken, so you don't have to worry about their con stat. And then repair it later with the hammer, and if you want to. I didn't want to do that either, so I just let it be, and I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. Yeah, there's a Killing Edge, Silver Bow. I have the enemies pulled up now. A Silver Sword, Master Sword, Halberd, Silver Sword and a Luna Manual, Wind Sword, Master Bow, Devil Axe, if you're interested in that, although it sucks ass in this game. And then the final one, the most notable, is, of course, the Pooji. This is the only place in the game where you can acquire a second Pooji, which is pretty good because, the Pooji is a great weapon. You might have already broken it by this point because Orson's around for the whole game, or most of it at least, if you don't count Manster. And it's like his bread and butter, so you probably used it a lot. And it might be nice to get another one without having to spend a hammer use on it. Now, for me, though, my Orson is dead. He died in Chapter 8X, if you recall, and I was too lazy to reset for him. So I said, fuck it, and I kept going, and I have no reason to get this Pooji. I didn't even fight these guys. Now, actually traversing this map is really fucking annoying for a few reasons. First of all, trees are just very difficult terrain to traverse. Most of your units are going to have very slowed down movement, and it's going to be a pain in the ass getting them across the trees. There are also various points in the trees that aren't labeled as forest, but instead they're labeled as a tile called thicket, which is completely impassable if you're not a flyer. So there are points where you just can't walk through the trees at all, and you have to go all the way around, and it eats up like 3 or 4 extra turns, and it's just really fucking obnoxious. I hate it so much. It doesn't add anything to the map. It's just extra tedium, I guess it kind of stops it from being just one open field of trees, which it kind of would be otherwise. But I don't know. It's just not fun to navigate, and I don't really enjoy that. But then the icing on the cake, and I'm sure many of you are probably waiting for me to talk about this, there's the warp tiles. The warp tiles are tiles on the map where if you have a unit wait on them, it teleports them to a completely different part of the map. And if you look on War of Dragons, you will find like an exact diagram of where each warp tile is and where they take you. Of course, this is really annoying. I don't like it very much. There are times where it can screw you over, or much more likely, it's just going to make it even more obnoxious trying to get across the map. But it's really not that big of a deal for a couple reasons. First of all, there are ways to mitigate this. If you have a unit do something that is not the wait command on that tile, then it will not activate. So basically, if you like have them use a vulnerary, or if you have them pick up or drop a unit, then you can kind of get around this limitation. But then the other thing with it is just that there aren't that many of them, and most of them are in not particularly annoying locations. There is one that is directly on your path to exit the map. I guess there are two ways that you could exit the map. You can go right and then up, or you can go up and then right. And I chose to go up and then right. And there's one there that is really annoying to deal with. It's like smack dab on your path out of the forest. And it teleports you pretty much all the way back to the beginning, which is just so fucking annoying. There's two others that are on, I assume, the route that you could go if you went up, or rather right and then up. And those look like they could be annoying as well, but I didn't go that way, so I don't really know. And then there's a couple over by the boss, and they're not super difficult to avoid. You might get unlucky, and one of them ends up teleporting you away from the boss if you're trying to kill him or block the reinforcements or whatever. But for the most part, it's fine. There's another map in the game that makes warp tiles way worse and uses them to much more annoying effect, and I'll have plenty to complain about with that map later. But this time around, it's okay. It's like a fine introduction to the concept and might prepare you to deal with it again later on. Although, of course, this map is not going to be visited by every player because they could go either A route or B route. So it doesn't really work in that sense. You'd think they would put it on a mandatory map, but, I'm glad this map isn't mandatory because it sucks, but, Now, as you progress through the map, there are going to be a few recruitable characters for you. The first of these that you're probably going to notice is Shanam. He's in the group in the northwest part of the map. If you don't remember, Shanam showed up in Chapter 14. He had a conversation with Homer if you waited a couple turns to recruit him. If you didn't wait a couple turns to recruit Homer, then you actually didn't get this conversation, so you probably won't know how to recruit him. But if you did, you'll probably be able to figure it out. You recruit him by talking to him with Homer. And Homer, basically, they have like a little back and forth about, you're joining up with the Empire now, huh? And Shanam says, listen, I'm in over my head, you gotta get me out of here, because otherwise I'm just gonna die, either from you guys or from the Empire. And Homer agrees to let Shanam come with Leif. Shanam is a very, very, very fun character. He's one of my favorite characters in the game, if not the entire series. I just think he's really fucking funny. The other place you would remember, I can't believe I forgot about this, is like my favorite moment in the whole game, is the conversation with Merida in Chapter 15. I think that's just genuinely maybe the funniest moment in the entire series, like without any amount of exaggeration. But if not, it's at least up there for sure. So I love him. I love him as a character. He actually is a recycled concept from FE3, which had the character of Samto or Samuel, but it's fine. He's a lot more fleshed out here, and I'm glad that they revisited that concept in a context where they were able to give it a lot more thought and a lot more attention, because Samto was not a very noteworthy character, especially in FE3. In FE12, I think he gets a little bit more with supports and stuff, but it's not a lot. Now, in terms of gameplay, Shanam is completely fucking useless. He has terrible, terrible base stats at a point in the game where, most of your units are going to be really strong, probably already promoted. His growth rates are okay, but they're nothing really to write home about. He has a pursuit critical coefficient of 0, which actually, I forgot to mention this earlier, but Ilios also has a PCC of 0. And what that means is, it's not that he doesn't get a multiplier to his crit when he makes a second attack. He literally cannot critical on his second attack. It is impossible because his crit is multiplied by 0. So no matter what crit he has, it will always be 0. This makes it very frustrating, as you might imagine, to try to use him, because you can't even bank on him getting kills with crits and stuff like that. His EXP growth will not be that fast compared to a lot of other units. On Paragon mode, I guess he'll level up pretty quickly, but not compared to most of your others. Now, a couple of noteworthy things about Shanam, though, is that, first of all, he is in a game like Thracia, where it's very easy to make any character good and usable. You can give him scrolls. Combat is not that hard to be good at in this game. Everyone caps at 20, so if you get him a few level ups, maybe you even save some stat boosters for him. None of that stuff's really worth it, though. I mean, he's fun, and I love using him, and I did use him. I used him a shitload next map, and he's already up to level 10, I want to say, promoted. And he has decent stats all around now, but I'm not going to say that that's like a good decision, because it's not. You're just completely wasting your time on a fucking nothing garbage unit. Now, the other thing that's noteworthy about Shan-Am is that he has a skill, and it is a completely unique skill, and it's called Bargain, which did show up in FE4, but I don't think any other unit has it in this game. And basically, it works exactly like it did in that game. If you go to a shop with this character, all items are half off. I think that is meant to be him leveraging the fact that he is pretending to be Shannon, and making sure that he is getting a discount on things like that, because everyone thinks that he's like this legendary hero, but he's not at all. So that can be kind of handy, especially with how strong or expensive weapons are in this game. It can be kind of handy to have, although of course you're going to be capturing most of your weapons. But I've found myself running into the scenario where I just don't have very many basic weapons. Look at the enemies in this chapter, right? We got a few silver weapons. We got like a sleep edge. We got a master sword. We got like a couple of fancy axes. There's no fucking iron weapons. You can if you capture the pirate and the dancer, you can get an iron axe and an iron sword. But man, I don't need that shit. What I really need is lances. I have like no good lances, or no lances in general. So having someone who can go into a store and buy some iron lances for 50% off, that's a pretty big deal, and I'm happy with that. But of course, you don't need to use him at all to get that benefit. You just have to have him visit the store. I think you can even actually do it from the preps menu, so it's not like you even have to bring him to the map. So he has a good utility in that sense, but it's not worth really deploying him unless you find him funny and like using him, in which case, go off. That's exactly what I'm doing. I've never gone B route before, so I've never used Shan-Am before, and I decided that this time I was going to go B route, continue from B route, and use Shan-Am for the entire game. Hopefully. We'll see how it works out. On turn 2, we get a little event where Sarah, if you remember from chapter 17a, she comes out and has a conversation with Reincock. And basically, there's a lot that happens here. Basically, it establishes that the soldiers in charge here are responsible for looking after her. Reincock seems to respect her as a position of authority. He calls her Lady Sarah, Milady, and is like asking her for things rather than telling her things. And we find out that the reason for this is because Sarah is Manfroy's granddaughter, which is really fucking crazy. And also, you would not know this if you didn't go B route, because in A route, they don't mention it at all. In fact, they don't mention shit about it at all. Nothing about Sarah is really brought up in that conversation. She just kind of says, hey, I'm going to join you, and then goes with you. But in this chapter, she actually has a lot more going on. She has a lot more of a personality. She's bored. She really wants to leave because she didn't realize it was going to be this boring when she agreed to come here. And when she senses Leif coming, she makes the active decision to go looking for him rather than waiting for them to come to you. Now, I don't know how she ended up in that church in A route. That's never given a proper explanation, although I have my theories, which we'll get to much later on. Final chapter, actually. But we'll just leave it at that. I have theories as to why she's here and how she ended up where we found her in A route, but nothing that I can prove, basically. Interestingly, Salem and Sarah have a conversation here. If you bring Salem to this map, you can talk to Sarah with him. He doesn't recruit her. You can only recruit her by talking to Leif. But if you talk to her before Leif recruits her, she has to be an enemy for this to work. Salem will have a conversation with her. And this conversation brings explicit attention to something that may have clicked in several of your minds when you realize this about Sarah, and that is that way back in chapter 6, I think it was, when Leif told August about Avel being turned into stone, August said the only way that we would be able to free her is by using the Kia staff, and the Kia staff can only be used by someone who is in Manfroy's bloodline. And obviously, at the time, that seems completely fucking ridiculous. No one from Manfroy's bloodline would ever help Leif, much less Manfroy himself. But now, Manfroy's granddaughter is basically offering herself up on a silver platter and saying, hey, Leif, I want to come with you. And Salem makes that connection before anybody else does, which is interesting because this happens like way before you recruit Salem. So I guess the rumors have spread around the army. I don't think Leif is going around telling each new recruit about his life story. Maybe he is, I don't know. But for some reason, Salem knows about Avel and has decided, has made that connection like, oh, Sarah can help us. When Leif talks to her to recruit her, we get a little bit of Sarah backstory. Basically, she's talking to Leif about his parents and saying like, oh, they're both dead. And Sarah says that her parents also died. Mama died when I was little, and grandfather got angry at Papa for falling in love with Mama and killed him. It happened before I was born. So, basically, it sounds like Sarah's dad, Manfroy's son, was a member of the Loptir cult, but fell in love with someone outside of it, and ended up having a child. The child presumably got found by the Loptir cult, and her mom died. And now she's basically under the thumb of the Loptir cult. And it doesn't seem like Manfroy has any intention of valuing her as a member of his family. In fact, it would make more sense for Manfroy to find her fucking despicable, because she was born from a union that Manfroy would find absolutely horrible. So Manfroy probably doesn't care for her all that much, which kind of ties into some of the theories that I'm going to bring up later. But, so it doesn't seem like Manfroy has any particular reason to treat her well. So I have to imagine he has some kind of ulterior motive. Part of it, I would assume, is his bloodline is very powerful, and he doesn't want it getting into the wrong hands or the hands of his enemies. So the right hands, I guess it would be, because he's a fucking monster. In the conversation with Salem, Sarah mentions that his master's, that meaning Leif's voice, is calling out to her. And obviously, she can't mean this literally, so what is she talking about? Well, I think the most likely explanation is that she is hearing Leif's mind's desire to have Avel back. And knowing, he knows that the only way that can happen is if someone from Manfroy's bloodline helps him. And I think Sarah can feel that and decides to go along with him. Now, you might be wondering, since this is an escape map, is there any benefit to beating Reinkock and taking the monastery? And the answer is actually yes, because if you place Leif there, he can't, seize or anything. But if you have him wait there on that tile, then it'll start a sequence where you recruit a new unit. Oh, I missed the conversation earlier, but it ties into what we're talking about right now, so I guess it works. So at the beginning of the map, Reinkock was talking to one of his guys, and he said that they sensed some approaching guys. And at first they thought that it was Conomor of Ulster, which, if you remember, we talked about him in chapter 16a. And he is a great general that is leading the army of Ulster. And no one really knew why. They thought there must be some reason why he's doing this, because he wouldn't do it under normal circumstances. And it turns out that the reason why is because the Loptir Empire, or the Loptir cult, I should say, the cultists, have Princess Miranda as a hostage. Miranda is the princess of Ulster. She's the ruling, or she's next in line to be the ruler of Ulster. So her being a hostage has basically tied Conomor's hands and has made him decide to fight with the Empire. And if you have Leif visit the monastery, you will find Miranda locked up in the dungeons. And she actually gives Leif a hard time because I guess on his way as a fugitive, one of the many places he stopped was Ulster, and they spent a little bit of time there. Eventually, the Empire caught on and went to go invade Ulster, at which point her father was killed, and basically the Empire took Ulster for themselves. Now, she mentions that her father, the Lord of Ulster, was a gentleman and didn't really want to fight the Empire, but took Leif in anyway. So when the Empire came knocking, instead of fighting back, they just kind of told Leif to get out of there, or maybe just Leif ran on his own, whatever. And then he handed over Miranda as a hostage and succeeded the throne to the Empire. Now, Dorius basically says, your dad was a fucking pussy and didn't fight alongside us when the moment, when it really counted. He was not there for us. So I don't really feel sympathy for this guy, because ultimately what he brought everything that happened to him on himself. Now, Leif kind of intervenes at that point and says, listen, Dorius, that's pretty fucked up. But I think both of them have a point here, right? Like, there's a lot to be said for pacifism. I think it's a great mentality to have. But I also think that, when you have something like the Empire, which was, by all accounts, pretty fucked up, and you choose not to fight back in the face of that, in a certain sense, I think you kind of have what's coming to you, especially if you have other people who are depending on you to organize a defense and to help them out, and they just didn't do that. So they don't go into a whole lot of detail about it here, but I think this is a concept that comes up a lot in various stories and narratives and things like that. This idea of, should pacifism be this value that you hold above all else, even in the face of tyranny and in the face of people doing horrible things? Should you still be a pacifist under those circumstances? And I think people will have different answers to that question. I'm certainly not claiming to have the definitive right answer, but it's something to think about, right? Dorius clearly thinks no, although obviously he's biased because Count Ulster's decision made his life a lot worse and a lot more difficult. Miranda seems to, in a way, Miranda and Lenoan are in very similar positions, right? They both sheltered Leif for a time, and as a result, they invited the wrath of the Empire onto them. And whereas Lenoan kind of sees that as an inevitability, Miranda thinks that it's Leif's fault, whereas honestly, even if you don't want to take Dorius's, approach and say like, well, it was his fault anyway, it was going to happen anyway. Like, the Empire would not have just left Ulster alone, even if Leif was not... Actually, do they bring that up? Yes, the Empire planned to conquer Ulster all along. Prince Leif's presence was merely a convenient excuse to do so. I actually forgot about that part of the conversation, and then as I was talking about it, it came back to me. So yes, they even bring that up, right? Ulster would have been invaded anyway, and Leif being there was not necessarily what caused it. It was just kind of the catalyst. And yeah, so Dorius doesn't think that blaming Leif is really the right thing to do. Although I definitely can understand why he would you would think that he took it a little bit too far. Miranda's been imprisoned here for a while, and before this she was imprisoned somewhere else. Basically, her life has been a fucking miserable pile of shit for a while, and the first thing that Dorius does is, she gets a little sassy with Leif, and Dorius decides to fucking shit on her dad and say that her dad was a piece of shit. And yeah, I don't like Dorius very much. I think he's an interesting character, and I think he's a very interesting foil to August, but ultimately I think he's kind of a piece of shit in a lot of ways. So I think it's interesting for sure. And I mean, so is August, right? That's one of the things I really like about this game is that all the characters are really layered, at least by this series standards, of course. There's plenty of deeper characters out there. Both Dorius and August have like these different perspectives, and in some ways they show the best of what humanity is capable of, and they push Leif in that direction, while at the same time they also are kind of fucked up in a lot of ways. Dorius putting so much emphasis on being a knight and dying a knightly death and having honor and things like that really kind of show that he's kind of biased, maybe even a little bit elitist. Whereas August has gotten his hands really dirty. He's a member of the church, but he's presumably killed and tortured a lot of people based on what we've heard about him. And while it's clear that now he's really trying to do good, especially, we see him as a member of Team Lewin, that's not, he has a very checkered past, I think it's pretty safe to say. So neither of them are really perfect people, and that's okay. I think that's a lot more interesting than them just being complete goody two shoes all the times. You know what I mean? I think it's more interesting. Okay, basically, the way you progress through this map kind of depends on what you want to do. Most of the time, I have decided to, I had to attempt this map a few times. So what I ultimately ended up doing was I brought Dean and Karine, and both of them killed the boss very quickly and started blocking the reinforcements. And then I went up, killed some guys there, recruited Shan M, and then went right, killed some guys there, and then escaped. Basically, that was what happened. Now, this last group of enemies has some tough guys in there. There's a Master Sword person, there's a couple strong guys in there. One of them has a wind sword, and I was like, a wind sword sounds pretty cool. I'll take that. I kind of want that. So I went to go get it, and turns out the guy has wrath. Now you might think, oh man, it sucks, but it's kind of on you, man. You didn't check his skills to see if he had wrath, and you're right, I didn't. So I'm not going to pretend like I did, and that it was completely unfair. But what I later found out was that he does not have wrath if you look at him in the preps menu. If you're doing the sweeping overview of the map and checking out every enemy before you start, he will not have wrath. But as soon as you start the map and you go and check him out after you have your units on the field and everything, he does have wrath. Which I cannot think of a bigger fucking middle finger to throw a player than that shit. That is the most infuriating design bullshit I've ever seen in my life. And again, it's just, why, man? Why the fuck would you do that? That's just so fucking obnoxious. And it doesn't seem like I can understand wanting to make an enemy more threatening. I think giving enemies wrath is fine. I think it's a good thing. But that just seems like a shitty gotcha. Like he had to have done that on purpose, right? Like maybe it was a design limitation or something, but this guy I assume he had to make the conscious choice to not just put wrath on the preps menu as well, like show that he has wrath on the preps menu as well, to potentially screw people over. And man, I really don't fucking like that. I also found out, thankfully not the hard way, I found out the easy way, that wrath goes through scrolls. You cannot override a crit from wrath with a scroll. So that method is out. And I need to reiterate, I really don't fucking like this game. I think it's one of the worst games in the series, and I would much rather play Revelation 1,000,000 times than this fucking bullshit. I hate this game. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say. I'll get off my soapbox now, but Jesus Christ, man. I hate that shit a lot. You escape with all your guys, and you escape with Leif, and that's the end of the map. You go on to Leonster. That's really all there is to it. Really tedious, really boring, shitty enemy design. Most of it was fine, right? Like, it was just that one guy, but man, that pisses me off. That really, really fucking pisses me off. That's all. And then you escape with everybody. It just takes forever to walk across the forest. God forbid you accidentally step on the warp tile near the top that sends you all the way back down to the bottom. It just takes 1,000,000 years. I don't like it. It's not as bad as Chapter 4 or 4X or, what's the other one I really hate? 12X. Those maps were just genuinely awful. But, it's not quite on that level. But it's down there. It's down there for sure. Oh, and I should probably talk a little bit more about Miranda, because I didn't really go into a whole lot of detail with her. But basically, as a character, we've already pretty much seen what she's about, at least for now. There might be more later, but for right now, at least, though, there's not really anything else going on with her. In terms of gameplay, Miranda is kind of an Est. I know a lot of people consider her an Est, and I can understand why. She has bad bases, but good growth rates, and a lot of potential to be good. She has Wrath as a skill. That's pretty fun. She has 70% magic, 70% speed growths. But her base stats are terrible. She has 7 magic, 8 speed. Her bases are almost as bad as Shanaham's, which is really sad, although I guess she does have some pursuit critical. What's her pursuit critical? Oh, it's just 1. But yeah, she's a tough character. The only reason I say she's kind of an Est as opposed to an actual Est is because she joins a little early to be an Est. I think most true Est archetype characters join towards the end of the game. There's only a couple though that fit into that archetype. That's part of why archetypes are so kind of messy, is that a lot of people try to put characters in archetypes that they don't fit in for the sake of categorization. But the more characters you try to put in that archetype that kind of stretch the definition, the less meaningful it is. I still think it's useful to have them as a way to kind of shorthand character descriptions. But, I think people need to chill out a little bit. Anyway, the only other noteworthy thing about her is that she promotes into a mage knight. So there's a third option for a mage knight, and this is actually the only way that you could get more than one, because Ilios requires you to get rid of your other one. So if you want 2 mage knights, you gotta go B route. Mage knight's a pretty fun class, so I can understand why someone might want to do that. But otherwise, nothing really noteworthy about it. She's a pretty forgettable, mediocre, maybe even bad unit in terms of gameplay, so So with that done, we can move on to talking about Chapter 17, which is called The Gathering Storm. So this chapter opens up with the premise that you need to approach Leonster from along a cliff, but there are a bunch of ballista on the cliff, and dealing with them is going to be tough. That's basically the gist. It's a pretty straightforward map. You have to go from the bottom right to the top left along a cliff face that has a bunch of ballista on it, and if you're not careful, you'll end up getting killed, and there's, a few different ways that you can go about dealing with that, and it's just a matter of figuring out what approach you would like to take. We get a cutscene in which we see Amalda from Chapter 15. Remember how I said that each of those guys, Connemore and Amalda, are both recruitable, but only one of them can be recruited, depending on the route you take, and the one that you can't recruit shows up on that route. So basically, you cannot recruit Amalda in B route, so she shows up on B route. Later on, if you don't kill her here, she shows up as a boss, so it might be worthwhile just killing her so that you don't have to deal with her later, because she can be kind of tough. But anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. This just characterizes her a little bit more. She's really mad about the child hunts, which, understandable. Apparently, Gustav, who is the leader of Leonster, the guy who's been put in charge of Leonster, has been taking children without even being asked to. It seems like he's trying to show initiative so that the Loptier Order will like him more and he'll curry favor with them. And Amalda kind of laments that this is going on, like he's doing it even though he doesn't have to. And she talks about how Prince Arvis, or I guess Emperor Arvis now, has kind of gone to shit because she used to really look up to him. And this is something that doesn't really get brought up in this game very much, but in the last game, it's mentioned a couple times. The Empire was doing pretty well. Like, after, the initial messiness of killing Sigurd and all those other guys, quelling a few initial rebellions, the Empire was generally very prosperous, which I'm not saying that it was good or that it should have been put into place, but at least in terms of making the citizenry happy, for the most part, it seems like they were doing a pretty good job. But then, all of a sudden, things changed, and we know that it's because Julius got possessed by Loptier, Manfroy started having more of a hand in how the Empire was run, and generally, the power started to shift from Arvis to the Loptier cult. Now, we know that, but most characters in the universe don't. They just assume that Arvis has gone bad and started doing these horrible things, even though we know it's a little bit more complicated than that. So she's kind of upset about that. I really looked up to this guy. I really thought he was a good leader. I wanted to be his knight, she even says. She was hoping to one day be one of his knights. But now she doesn't want anything to do with him. And this is honestly, considering what ultimately happens to her, right? Like, either you kill her here, or you kill her in the next chapter she shows up, or you don't do any of that and she just kind of fades into the background. This is kind of a sad way to end her character, just really feeling like her whole life has been not worth it up to that point. She had a specific goal in mind, a specific dream, and she's learning now that it's not only not going to come to fruition, but maybe it was a bad idea in the first place. And that's just kind of a position that, I feel bad for her to be in. And then on the other hand, you have Connemore, who, Connemore is like a knight who swore to fight and die alongside, fighting for Miranda. So honestly, I'm a little bit more comfortable killing him off. I think it's one of the many reasons why I think A route is better than B route, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't know. It's just worth thinking about, I think, and sparing a thought for Amalda and the tough position that she finds herself in. She's really trying to do her best. I made the comparison last time she showed up to Schindler from Schindler's List, which is a great movie. Again, I think it's an apt comparison. I think they're both just good people trying to do good things in the worst possible circumstances. Now, I initially said that this chapter was very simple, and it is. If you choose to approach it the normal way, it's pretty straightforward. You just run along the cliff, you kill the ballista, you kill the boss, maybe you kill Amalda as well, depending on the circumstances, and then you end the map. It's really straightforward. But there are a couple of factors at play here that make the chapter a little bit more interesting. There is a large village in this map. There's a bunch of houses on the ground, and there's actually also a house on a cliff over on the left side of the map. And each of those places well, not each of those, but the house on the cliff and like the village as a whole unit has different events that kind of make the map a little bit more textured. Let's start with the village first. If you visit a house, a specific house, with Leif, a village elder will be there, approaches him and says, "Hey, we are so loyal to you. We want you to take back Leonster so badly that we are prepared to fight and die alongside of you." And this is honestly a really, really interesting scene. I did not opt to do this in my playthrough, but I'm looking through the dialogue right now, and it's honestly genuinely fucking awesome. Leif is, of course, very opposed to this. He's like, what would be the point of getting Leonster back if there's no people to rule over? The people are gone, and I did all this for them to begin with, so what would be the point? The elder seems to be aware that the ballista would make it very unlikely that any of them would ever come back alive, so they're all prepared to sacrifice their lives, at least presumably. This guy is prepared to sacrifice his life and everybody else's life. I don't know if they all are, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt. And, so Leif gives him some pushback on this, and the elder basically says, "We have suffered so much under the rule of these guys that we are just so invested in getting this place back for us and for the people who come after us that we are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice if that's what it takes." You're actually given a choice here. Both August and Dorius are, considering it. They're they're advising Leif, and so August is kind of more on the side of doing it, but also understands that it's kind of not a good idea. Dorius is kind of on the opposite side, where he can see the benefit of it, but also doesn't want to do it. So it's kind of that same dichotomy where it's August versus Dorius, but this time they can genuinely see and understand both perspectives, and ultimately the choice falls to you, and you're given a dialogue option here of what to do with these guys. If you choose to do it, then they all come out of the houses and start charging the castle, and they make great bait for the ballista, and that is literally the point of what they're meant to do. They're supposed to be bait for the ballista so that you are more easily able to make your way to the castle and not have to worry about it. It's not really necessary, if I'm going to be honest. Your units at this point should be more than enough. There's a strategy that's good to employ called charm stacking, where if you have a character who has charm, you could give someone else the Kingslayer, the Kingmaker, which gives the charm skill. And then you have someone with High Avoid run, and I think Finn is a good candidate because he also gets support bonuses from Leif and Nana. That's kind of the trifecta, right? You have Nana who has charm, you have Leif use the Kingmaker, and then Finn gets support bonuses from both of them as well. So basically, as he runs forward, he's unhittable. So you could either have them use up all their ballista bolts, or you could just run up to them and kill them. You could do whatever you want to do, and then you'll probably be fine. But if you want an alternative option, these villagers seem more than willing to die for Leif's army, so I guess that's, is what it is. It's a very interesting choice that you have to make, although you might just want to not do it because you do get the opportunity to get a Master Seal in this map, and the only way to get it is either don't take up the village's offer, or you do take up the village's offer, but all the villagers live. So kind of do what you want. If you feel like having the villagers come out and help you, you might want to make sure that they all live. They don't all die instantly, so you do have a little bit of an opportunity to still use them as bait and get the Master Seal. but it's probably not worth it. You might as well just see the cutscene, say no, and then, do it yourself. The other house, the one on the bottom left on that cliff, there's a man who basically charges you 20,000 gold to open up a gate. Yeah, it's not great. So if you look at a picture of the map, you'll see that there are 2 entry points. There's one that actually leads to the castle gate that's over on the left. You need to go past all the ballista in order to get there. And then on the other hand, you have the right side, which is blocked off by a gate, but that's where Amalda's group is situated. If you go in through the left side, Amalda's group will come at you. So it's kind of just a matter of which approach do you want to take. I think it would be an interesting choice if both options were free, but the benefit of going through the right side does not warrant 20,000 gold. I barely even have enough gold to buy myself weapons, dude. I am not giving you 20,000 gold. But it is a welcome option. It makes the map a little bit more textured, in case, otherwise it would just be quite straightforward. And I kind of like that, But yeah, I've pretty much said everything there is to say about this map. There aren't any new recruitable characters. All the characters that we're getting on this route joined last chapter. I used this opportunity to train up Shanam. I had him fight a bunch of enemies. I had him kill a bunch of ballista. And he's doing pretty alright. He's got good stats now. He's a super high level promoted unit. So maybe they aren't that good, relatively speaking. But he's doing alright. He's making do. Oh, and Amalda has a scroll. I should mention that. If you care about getting all the scrolls, then you should steal it from Amalda or try to put her to sleep and capture her or something. But getting all the scrolls doesn't really matter, and this is the worst one, so I wouldn't really worry about it that much, to be honest. And you kill the boss, you get through the gate, that's it. The map's over. It's fine. I don't really have anything bad to say about it. I think that it's very straightforward. The options that it gives you to make it more interesting are not really worth it, but the fact that they're there is welcome, I suppose. And yeah, that's really it. I don't want to drag this out talking about it any more than I have to. It's an extremely serviceable map. That's really all there is to it. Now, after capturing the gate, they have a quick conversation about, we're here, we're in Leonster, we're going to go in and we're going to try to capture the castle. And they mentioned a guy named General Xavier. And Dorius is really upset about this guy. He considers General Xavier to be a horrible, monstrous traitor. He was once, in Dorius's words, an esteemed general of Leonster. And everyone loved this guy. He was just the best fucking dude of all time. Everyone trusted him. He was well known for being very just, and he was just based as hell, man. So Dorius doesn't really understand why he started working for the Empire. That's when a village elder, I assume the same village elder, shows up and explains that the reason Xavier has been fighting alongside the Empire so fervently is because, basically, there were still a lot of Leonster soldiers that were left behind after the castle was captured. And Xavier has these 8 guys who he considers to be his most trusted lieutenants, essentially. He considers them to be family. They have had their loved ones captured and held hostage inside of the castle. So Xavier will not join you unless you are able to free the hostages, which seems simple enough when you put it on paper like that. But the way you actually go about doing this is kind of a nightmare, and it's why Xavier is considered by many to be the hardest recruitment in the entire series. We'll get to that, but for now, just keep that in mind. But this is supposed to be your indication that Xavier is recruitable, basically. He's not just some random mini-boss. He can be turned, and if you do, he'll be a valuable ally. So yeah, that's chapter 17. And now we've gone through both of the routes. I know I kind of did that bit where it implied that I never did the first one, but yeah, I kind of let that facade slip a couple times already, so we're just gonna go ahead and take the mask off. Yeah, it was a bit, guys, in case that wasn't obvious. a very interesting set of maps. If nothing else, you can say that they're all very interesting maps. And I think it is worth considering which of the two routes is better. And we'll be doing this after every route split, because if you play through the game only once, you're only going to get 2 of these 4 maps. And the choice that you make is going to kind of affect your experience with the game. So, which of these 2 routes is better? Now, it kind of depends on what you're looking for, right? I think we can pretty much all agree, I hope we can all agree at least, that in terms of like the actual quality of the maps, in terms of having fun, well-designed chapters that are engaging to play through, A route is by far the superior option. 16A and 17A gave me a lot of hassle. They were kind of obnoxious in places, but for the most part, I was able to recognize, like, okay, this was my own fault. Anytime my units died, it was because I was being reckless or I was being careless, and I should have done XYZ. Especially 16A, I just kept getting my ass kicked by Ilios's group over and over and over again, but that's on me. This is because I wasn't being smart, I wasn't preparing adequately. I can acknowledge that. And then Chapter 17A is honestly genuinely pretty fun. Has a lot of interesting events and things like that. 16 and 17B, on the other hand, are really boring. The events that they have are not worth accessing in the case of 17B, or in 16B, it's just an incredibly obnoxious map that is not fun to play through, and incredibly tedious. And yeah, I mean, I think the general consensus is that A route is more fun. I think most people agree with that. But unfortunately, there is a little bit more that you have to take into consideration than which map is the most fun. Which I really wish that wasn't the case, but it is worth considering. B route is generally considered to have the better items. There's the most obvious example being the Puji axe, but also there's some good weapons from other units you can capture, like the Master Sword, the Silver Weapons, there's the guy with the Wind Sword, and there's a Luna manual, which you do get a Soul manual in A route, but I think, personally, I consider Luna to be a little bit better. Although it's not really that big of a difference, I don't think. And then 17A, or rather 17B, has a shop, which I don't think either map in A route has. So you can buy weaponry if you want to, although you can buy weaponry from the preps menu anyway, unless you want like better stuff than the basic iron weaponry. So that's not really a huge factor. But yeah, I think obviously the main draw is the Puji. I think a lot of people use Orson. A lot of people consider Orson to be one of the best units in the game, myself included. And so having a chance to acquire another one of his famous weapons, his most powerful weapon, his bread and butter, really, I think that's a real big draw for a lot of people. And then I think the other thing to take into consideration is like the narrative, because at the end of the day, these games have a story, a really good story at times. And honestly, I think both of these routes are really, really interesting in their own way, which is kind of a shame because I think I see the appeal of having it split up like this. Like in one route, you get more info on Sias, and then on the other route, you get more info on Sarah. One route has the really interesting stuff with Ilios, and then the other route has Shanam, who's a pretty fun character. In terms of main story events, I think they're both pretty much identical, right? Like, they go to Leonster, right? But the character interactions, the characters that you have access to, the experiences that Leif has to go through are pretty similar in both. I think B route is a lot better if you're looking at it in terms of Leif's characterization and the character development that he gets. But A route is arguably just as good if you consider the factors of other characters, right? Like, Olwen gets some interesting stuff here, Kempf gets some interesting stuff here, we get a lot on Sias, Ilios is a very interesting character, there's some more texture and world building given about Celise, there's some good stuff there. And then B route is really only better for Sarah. I know Miranda, you get Miranda, but that's honestly more of a thing for Leif than it is for Miranda, I would say. And then Shanam, we already kind of know what Shanam's deal is, right? Like, he's a kind of a goofball, he's a fraud, and there's really, like, the conversations in B route don't really give him anything more than that. So, yeah, I think it's kind of worth considering going B route if you're interested in more of Leif's story, but going in A route if you want to see more a wider variety of interesting characters. But I think the final nail in the coffin for B route is the units that you get access to, because frankly, of the 2 exclusive units that you get in each route, in A route, you get Misha and Sloof, whereas in B route, you get Shanam and Miranda. Shanam and Miranda are both not very good. Miranda has the potential to be good. I mean, I guess so does Shanam, but pretty much everyone does anyway, right? Like, you don't need another mage on your team. You already have Olwen, you already have Asvel, you're gonna have Sarah, who's really easy to use. Sarah is just basically better Miranda in a lot of ways. I know that she gets a horse, but in a lot of the maps coming up, horses aren't going to be particularly important anyway, and it's gonna take her a little while to get promoted on a horse anyway, so it's not as big of a benefit as you might think it is. And then the A-Route characters, on the other hand, you get a very serviceable flying unit who can be really beneficial, even if she doesn't have, again, just like Miranda, she doesn't get to have her mount for very much longer over the course of the game, but if you're only going to have a mount for a few chapters, it might as well be a Pegasus instead of a horse. And also she starts on her mount instead of Miranda, who has to promote onto one, so there's a pretty big difference there. And then, of course, Sloof. Sloof is genuinely one of the best characters in the game. Maybe that's going a little bit far, but A-Route staffing is just so important. A-Rank staffing is just so important, you know? There are plenty of chapters left in the game that you're going to want to warp skip, or even if you're not warp skipping, there's just a lot of useful things for a person who has A-Rank staffs to do. If you're just playing casually, I would say that the only character who's, like, likely to have A staffs at this point besides him is Safi. Salem can absolutely do it, but it requires a pretty concerted effort if you're just playing through the game normally and you're just using him for combat for the most part. You're probably not going to have him at A staffs. So considering that, I think it's very useful to have a guy who has a guaranteed A rank staffs and is able to help you with anything that you would need that utility for. So ultimately, it's between, in A route, you get better characters, more fun maps, and more characterization for, like, side characters, whereas in B route, you get better items and more characterization for Leif. I think that's pretty much the best way to put it. And what you prefer from those options is obviously going to be down to you. I think that overall, having played B route for the first time, it actually wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, but I still pretty much would rather go A route every time, I think. I don't see myself going B route anytime in the near future if I ever decide to play this game again, which maybe I won't. I always say that, but I end up coming back anyway, so who knows. So go ahead and make sure you send me your answers as to which route you prefer, either by tweeting at IMadeMeleeKirby or emailing turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com. Alright, so with all of our maps discussed, we can go ahead and talk about our map gauntlet, which is pretty easy this time around, I would say. Personally, I don't think any of the maps are excellent, but there's a pretty clear winner in my mind, and that's Chapter 17A. I think that the events that this map has in it are really interesting. I think the characterization for Syas? Why did I say it like that? What the fuck? I think the characterization for Syas is pretty awesome, and I think it gives a lot of texture to his character, who I already like quite a bit. There's a good amount of things to keep track of. You have the sorcerers up on the ledge. You have the ballista that you have to deal with. You have the reinforcements coming from behind. There's just more going on, really, than most of the other maps. 16A, you pretty much just walk in a straight line. 17A, you walk in a straight line with some very suboptimal deviations that you can take from that. And then Chapter 16B is just miserable and not fun, and that's definitely the worst of the four. So yeah, 17A wins pretty much by default, although I think it's a pretty solid map all around. Now, comparing it to our previous reigning champ, which is Chapter 14, it's not really a contest. I think Chapter 14 is, again, one of the best chapters in the game. I only really see one other chapter toppling it, possibly, and even that's, like, I'm questioning. I'll have to see kind of how it pans out, but it's actually coming up next episode. Ooh. Speaking of which, next episode we're covering chapters 18, 19, and 20, so look forward to that. Now it's time for everybody's favorite segment, the news. And unfortunately, guys, we just don't have any news to talk about. There's absolutely nothing that's happened over the past few months. No noteworthy things that have happened at all. And of course, I'm completely joking because in the time that it took me to get those last 3 episodes out, literally a week, maybe even less, after getting those... No, it was like a week and a half before getting those episodes out. After I had recorded all of them, after I was done editing most of them, we get an announcement for a new main series Fire Emblem game, Fire Emblem Engage, and it looks okay. I'm tentatively excited. I mean, obviously, like, I've said this on numerous occasions, and in case it wasn't just implied by the fact that I'm doing this podcast, Fire Emblem is my favorite video game series, and I'm always excited about new Fire Emblem. I'm gonna get this game day one, I'm going to play it, and I'm probably going to like it. I just have some reservations that I think a lot of the community has also been having, primarily with how influenced and inspired this game seems to be by Fire Emblem Heroes, the mobile game spin-off. And I don't even really dislike Fire Emblem Heroes. I think its format works well for a mobile game. I don't like the gacha system. I think the gacha system is, at best, just shitty game design. At worst, it is actively malicious and morally repugnant. But I'm not here to start that debate. I just don't like it very much. But in terms of the gameplay and the gameplay mechanics, I think that it's a fine mobile game. You know, I think it is genuinely a fantastic adaptation of the series that I love so much onto mobile phones. I just don't vibe with it personally because by nature of it being a mobile game, they had to strip away a lot of the more complex stuff that I enjoy about the series, and that's fine. It's just not for me. I don't think it's a bad game, but it's just not for me. Now, this game seems to have some inspiration from that. I mean, the most obvious thing, elephant in the room, is the fact that you can summon past Fire Emblem characters to fight alongside you, and they seem to give you bonuses to your stats. I might be already, like, I'm looking at the Serenus Forest page, there might be stuff that I'm missing that I'm not aware of, but they seem to give you bonuses to your stats, maybe give you extra skills and things that you can do in battle, but you don't seem to be able to play as them. They kind of just show up like JoJo stands and fight alongside you, although I guess you're the one doing the fighting, so I guess JoJo stands isn't really applicable, but you know what I mean. They're like spirits fighting beside you, but they're not actually doing any of the combat. Almost like the back unit in a pair-up. That's probably the best comparison. It seems like they're tied to getting these rings, and a lot of jokes have been made about, you know, you get the rings and it's called Fire Emblem Engage, and it's very funny, but, you know, we don't know anything about the rings, really. There's some cool characters. I like the Jagan, presumably is the Jagan. The other way that this game seems to be inspired by Heroes is the aesthetic. I think that obviously the characters look like they are from, what's the main place in that game? Asker? I think that's where the main lords are from, Sharina and Alphonse. It seems very heavily inspired by that aesthetic. The villain looks very similar to something. It looks like they could have pulled him straight out of Heroes, honestly. Grima is there, I think. It's called the Fell Dragon, and it might be Grima. Or it might not be, because it doesn't look anything like Grima. But it's called the Fell Dragon, which is clearly, like, there's no way they didn't know what they were doing with that. They clearly named it that on purpose. So, I'm just a little nervous is all. There seems to be some icons and stuff on the screen that looks like it may be pulling from Heroes, like the color system. But it's hard to tell, really. It might just be using the same color system that was in Fates, which was just basically the traditional weapon triangle, except a few other items or weapon types were thrown in for good measure, which I didn't really mind. I thought it was okay. So overall, I don't think that there's enough information to say outright whether it's good or bad. I mean, obviously, right? Like, we still know basically nothing about it. So I'm not going to try to make any sweeping proclamations, but what I will say is that this is the first time in a very long time, maybe ever, that I haven't been immediately excited about a Fire Emblem game, which I think speaks to a couple things. First of all, I think it looks a little bit worse, in my opinion, than some of the more recent Fire Emblem games did at their launch, or at their trailer, I should say, their trailer launch. at their reveal. That's the word I'm looking for. But also, I think it speaks to my ever-evolving skepticism of this series. After Fates came out and was so bad in so many ways, and then Shadows of Valentia came out, I honestly don't really have anything bad to say about Shadows of Valentia. I think it is perfectly serviceable for what it is, but I know a lot of people don't like it. And then Three Houses, I think, is good, but also had a lot of lackluster elements that made the game kind of feel like it was lacking polish in some places. So I think the cycle of me getting extremely excited about a Fire Emblem game only for it to come out and not really live up to the hype, I've never really considered that to be a bad thing, really. Like, I've never been disappointed because a Fire Emblem game didn't live up to my expectations. When I got Three Houses, I played Fire Emblem Three Houses for like 3 weeks straight as I went through all the routes and did all the routes. So clearly I liked the game well enough, and I still do. When I got Fates for the first time, I remember staying up till 3 in the morning to get up to Chapter 9 of Conquest when that game first came out. So I'm sure I'm going to like the game, is the long and short of what I'm saying here. I think that I've just kind of been more conditioned to temper my expectations a little bit, because, I mean, they always seem like they're going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, and then maybe sometimes they're not, and that's okay. Like, they're fine, good games. I really like them, but I shouldn't get my expectations super through the roof for them, basically, is all I'm trying to say. And that's what I'm doing here. I think my expectations are reasonable. I think I'm going to enjoy the game. I'm going to play it for 3 weeks straight when it comes out, because of course I am. And then, in terms of what I've been doing, I guess I should mention, there's not really any other non-hero related news, at least not that I can see, and if there was, you guys probably wouldn't care anyway. It's like, no, there was one thing. Where was it? Hold on, I gotta find it. Merchandise. 3 Houses themed cushions and blankets by Empty. Honestly, that's kind of based. I might get these. How much are they? $50, I think. Hold on, I gotta check this. What does this convert to? Okay, $30 blankets. That's honestly not super bad. I'd buy a $30 Claude blanket. Why not, you know? The cushions are closer to like $40, so that might be a little. So yes, in terms of what I've been doing, I've been watching a lot of anime. Like, a lot of anime. I've been trying to work on my absolutely gargantuan backlog for anime and video games. The anime side of that is going really well. I've seen a lot of shit that I have been meaning to get to for a very long time. And currently I have been binging, in particular, Inuyasha. Inuyasha is a show that I watched when I was a kid. I was really into it, and I decided to go back to it. It's 160 episodes, so it's quite long, but it's fine. It's a pretty solid shonen action series. Or, it's not. Is it shonen? I don't know what the actual term is, but I don't think it's shonen. It's something else, but it doesn't matter. Oh, and then I've been playing a shitload of Trails from Zero, which is the 4th game in the Trail series. I mentioned this a few episodes ago, but I had just barely started it at that point. The Trail series is a huge series of JRPGs that many people are now familiar with because Trails of Cold Steel has hit mainstream popularity. But it started, I mean, honestly, the history of the series is really fucking long, and I don't know all of it. But the Trail series, as we would know it, started a while ago. I want to say in like the 2000s with a game called Trails in the Sky. And there was a trilogy of those games. And then there was a duology of games that took place in another country in that world. And those were the Crossbell games, Trails from Zero and Trails from Azure. And those games came out. They haven't actually... No, Trails from Zero just got officially localized in English. So that's cool. If you're interested in that, you could pick it up. Or you could do the long-standing fan translation, which I'm not going to tell you how to access because I don't want to get in any trouble. But there is a long-standing fan translation that has been going on for some time and has made the game playable in English for many years because the game's been out in Japan for a very long time. It's been out since, the PS Vita, and people have not had a way to play it in English officially until now. So if you want to do that, it's on like Steam, it's on Switch, it's on a bunch of other stuff. So go and pick it up if you're interested. But Trails from Azure still has not been localized, so you're going to have to play the fan translation from that. And then, of course, we have the whole Cold Steel series. Everyone knows those games. Everyone likes those games. And then there's like a couple more that have not been localized in English yet. I think there's a 5th Cold Steel game. And then there's 2 that take place in Calvard called Trails from Black or Trails Kuro, which means black. I don't know exactly, but anyway, this is a long-standing series of JRPGs. I love them. I think that they're fantastic for the most part. I didn't like the 3rd game very much, the last game in the Sky Trilogy, but don't skip it. A lot of people say you can skip it, but you can't skip it. It's definitely required reading. I just thought it was just okay, as opposed to very, very good, like all the rest of them are. I'm loving Trails from Zero. I love how this series is very consistent about, like, it feels long, but at least in my opinion, based on what I know about the later games in the series, it doesn't feel like it is being dragged out unnecessarily. Maybe Cold Steel for a little bit there. Maybe Cold Steel only needed to be 2 or 3 games, but it got 4 or 5, I guess, technically. So maybe you can make that argument. But the reason that the series is going on for so long is because each sub-series covers a different part of this world. The first 3 games take place in one country. The next 2 games take place in another country. The Cold Steel games take place in Erebonia. Then the Kuro games are taking place in Calvard. So there's a lot of different... And the continent is massive, right? And there's still places that we don't even know about. So I could see this series going on for a long time, which is good both for my enjoyment of it and also the wallets of the people who make it. I do hope that it ends someday, because it definitely has the potential to just keep going and going and going. They have not made a whole lot of progress in, like, taking on the big bads of that universe. So, anyway, I'm kind of going on a rant now, and I don't want to get into spoilers, but basically, if you want to get into the series, I know a lot of people say you can start with Cold Steel. I know a lot of people recently have been saying that you can start with Zero, which just makes no sense to me. Please do not start with Zero. Either, if you're going to start with a series that is not Sky, start with Cold Steel. But preferably you would start with Sky, because Sky is the best starting place. It is the introduction point for the entire series and all these characters, and it'll also give you a pretty good indication if you like the series, because in my opinion, the first Sky game is pretty much representative of all the games that have come after, for the most part. There's obviously been some notable examples of exceptions to that rule, but I'm talking like I've played the entire series, but I've only played 3.5 games, so don't take my word as gospel, but, you know, it's worth checking out. I think it's garnered a lot of attention because of how popular Cold Steel has gotten. So I can respect Cold Steel for that. But I do think you should start with Trails in the Sky. Anyway, other than that, you know, nothing else really comes to mind. I'm sure I've seen a couple other anime, but it's not really. I dropped Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I know I was playing that for a while. I didn't care for it very much. I loved the first game a lot. First game is one of my favorite games of all time. But the sequels have just not really done it for me, so I don't know if I plan on revisiting it. I probably will at some point, but... Oh, fuck. I completely forgot. Okay. So, very exciting news for me, specifically. It's a funny coincidence that this came up, actually, but a few episodes ago, I was talking about, I think it was Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and I mentioned that Xenoblade Chronicles 1... Why did I say it like that? I mentioned that Xenoblade Chronicles 1 is my second favorite game of all time, and that the first favorite game of all time was an obscure JRPG for the PlayStation 1. So that game is called Suikoden 2. I didn't even bother saying the name in that episode because not that many people have heard of it, and even fewer people have actually played it. But, yeah, the reason I bring it up now is because at some point, I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was a few weeks ago now, it got announced that they are making an HD remaster of both Suikoden 1 and Suikoden 2. I've not actually completed Suikoden 1. I've played a good amount of it. And then Suikoden 2 is genuinely my favorite game of all time. So I am unbelievably excited. It's like Christmas came early for me. Although we're not actually getting it until, I think they said summer of 2023, but... man, it's going to be worth the fucking wait, I can tell you. It's such a good game, and most of what's holding it back, in my opinion, is the kind of spotty by modern standards English translation. I mean, honestly, it's not even spotty by modern standards. It's spotty by even 1999 standards or whenever that game came out. So it's a tough game to get into, but with this, it's, we're getting a whole updated translation. The visuals are getting redone a little bit. I mean, obviously it's an HD remaster, but also like some of the UI elements are being updated a little bit. So that's really cool. And I cannot even begin to express how happy I am about this. I've talked to people who have no interest in that game, who have been like, well, because you like it so much and because it's getting this accessible HD port, it's coming to like Steam, Switch, PlayStation, I think Xbox, I'm not sure. A lot of my friends have been like, yeah, I'll check this out because it's accessible. I am so genuinely excited. I just really fucking like that game. And I can't wait to get my hands on it and play it again because, man, I love it. And honestly, I'm kind of considering just going back and replaying the old version. I don't own it. It's prohibitively expensive to buy. But it is, I have my ways, wink. Anyway, I think that's it for real this time. I hope you guys have a great rest of your afternoon, evening, morning, midnight, whenever you're watching this. And make sure you answer that question on which route you prefer in this game by tweeting at I'm Amelia Kirby or emailing terminalpodcast@gmail.com. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.